This edition of our podcast is brought to you by 360 Health and Well Balanced Nutrition.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hey, Eleanor, how's it going?
I don't know. I'm so dumb. I don't think I'm up to this. I don't think I can do podcast. Nobody's listening to our podcast. Why are we doing
Oh
this?
my goodness. You need to read the book Self-Compassion
Oh, maybe.
by Kristin Neff. Oh, we have read it. Let's talk about it.
Oh, yes, right. We did. All right. But yeah, I think this book was written maybe for me. I may have some issues that we could discover as we go through this book. The proven power of being kind to yourself.
Yeah, so Self-Compassion by Kristin Neff
Yeah,
was
where did
referenced in a past book that we read, the
Telomere Effect?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And I've also seen her work through Brene Brown, which I've read many of her books as well.
So you were kind of familiar with who she is.
Yeah, so I kind of forced this book on us.
Yes, you did. She's educated at UC Berkeley, right? She's an associate professor in human development at the University of Texas at Austin.
Cool. And who is it published by?
I don't know, Morrow. Yeah, and it was a 2011.
Yeah, it's an older book.
Yeah, and HarperCollins is the overarching publisher, which is, HarperCollins, they've been around for a long time. She's considered a pioneer who first established self-compassion as a field of study maybe 10 years ago. And she gives lectures on self-compassion, and I actually went out and looked at a little, it wasn't a TED Talk, but it looked like a TED Talk. And so I kind of got a sense of her as a whole person, not just on the page. And she does workshops, and she is working to help people develop self-compassion.
Yeah, I think it's very important work.
And well, I kind of go, yeah, this is one of those self-help books where, if you have trouble, maybe this is the book for you to read. And then I'm thinking, oh, that might be me. But I struggled with this because it was so psychological and psychiatric, and I have very thin experience in that area. So I feel maybe not as strong a reviewer on this, perhaps.
Yeah, it's not as science-y as our other books.
It's a really feely book.
And she does reference several studies, but it is more on like the mindset and and that's a little different. But important because the research shows when we have more self-compassion, we are more optimistic, we experience more positive emotions, we are able to create more authentic and mutually supportive friendships, we have improved resiliency, more motivation, and we're more likely to achieve our goals. So
that all sounds good.
That all sounds great, right?
That sounds really good. But then she says self-love seems so unrequited.
Well, doesn't she say that it's not really self-love?
No. So then she gets into a whole lot of pages on semantics between self-compassion, self-esteem, self-appreciation. And, so you really kind of have to pay attention as you're reading this. So what is she talking about here? Did I read that correctly? I found it convoluted.
So I listened to it on Audible. And maybe it was an easier to listen to kind of book.
Oh, maybe. Oh, that would be interesting because I know I have had different experiences listening to a book than reading one.
Yeah.
I might try that.
Well, let's share what she says that self-compassion is not. So it is not being absorbed with oneself or always thinking that you're perfect, or it's not like loving yourself to that extent. And it's not self-esteem. She does go into self-esteem quite a bit and how, self-esteem is where we're thinking that we're, either better or worse than others. And
It's sort of like I was talking about at the beginning of the podcast.
right. And
that negative head trash.
And the research shows that, whether you have low self-esteem or positive self-esteem, it does not equate to those things that we said self-compassion can do. So one area she goes into is where we've gone wrong with trying to bring up kids with high self-esteem.
Yes, yeah. In Western cultures.
In Western cultures where, okay, here, you get a trophy for just trying. And, we can't say anything negative to our kids because it'll ruin their self-esteem. And she kind of calls out that it's not really self-esteem that's as important here. It's self-compassion. And so self-compassion is also not sugarcoating the truth or always,
it's more realistic assessment, isn't it?
Yeah, it's accepting the truth for what it is,
and that
not tying that to your worth.
But she talks about the idea of self-kindness and then recognizing common humanity and mindfulness.
Yeah, right. So those
three
core components.
Yeah, and that what you were just saying is if you can have an accurate self-awareness skill and then accept it, instead of saying it's deficient or it's overinflated.
Yeah.
That idea, and then just hold it in mindfulness and observe it, not react to it.
Right.
Which it is a training, I think, at some level if you have never practiced mindfulness. So, yeah, she was weaving all sorts of things in here. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Okay.
So if you often have that self-critic, that inner self-critic, then you would really benefit from reading this book.
Yeah, and she says that we're kind of, and I'll go with he says the science side a little bit. She talks about the brain being wired for negativity evolutionarily, that we notice the negative things more often than the positive things. And that's something she helps us in her writing to say you need to swing that over a little bit and start noticing the positive things about yourself. But the reason that we look at the negativity is that if there's an alligator at the side of the water where you're trying to get your drink, you better pay attention to him or you'll get eaten. So you're just going to notice the negative stuff as a self-preservation because we are seeking safety and security in order to perpetuate our species. So we're up against kind of a tough thing, and particularly if it's been reinforced during your development that you are worthless.
I was going to say, well, you just called out kind of the animal part of our brain.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also that nurturing part of our brain where the environment that we've been taught, if we're to be self-critical, if that's what we've learned from a young age, then that's what we'll continue to do unless we break the habit with self-compassion. So she ties those who have that strong self-critic, the research points that is related to depression and a strong dissatisfaction with life.
And the inability to have good relationships, she suggests.
Yeah, definitely. And if you have an extreme self-criticism issue, you're much more likely to even attempt suicide because that natural survival instinct is even overrun by this severe criticism of yourself, which that's scary.
Yeah, it's very scary. And we know that's the statistics on suicide are increasing. When I think about reinforcement, I often jump to the family unit or the situation someone develops in, even in utero. If you have a mother that's an alcoholic, you may have fetal alcoholic syndrome even before you're born, So environment, speaking about the environment during development, well, our school systems in the United States are struggling with how do we do this? And she suggested that since some schools won't give an F, or they will give an E. Maybe the E is better because it follows D, but F means you're a failure, you're a flunk, you can't do it. But grade inflation. You were talking about merit. Just by showing up, you get a pat on the back. You're here, not whether you understood anything that was happening. But she was saying that our college graduates can't compete internationally, but they have really wonderful credentials. But I don't know. So when she was talking about we need to be compassionate and structuring the way that we motivate or help motivate the development of self-compassion, I had a struggle with, I don't know if I can even put it into words, but and this is because I'm from a Western culture and merit. There's a thing on merit and understanding that I understand something versus I'm going to act like I understand it. And that would be what you were saying when you self-esteem versus self-compassion. So,
well, and what she's trying to say is that we need to teach our kids it's okay to fail. It's okay to not get it right the first time.
that it's our best instructor?
That
Or one
failure
of
is
them?
our best instructor, yeah. And that when you are a self-compassionate person, you realize that you are not a failure. You just made a mistake, and now you can move on. And the kids and the people with more self-compassion get up and try it again, where if you have self-esteem issues, you think, oh, I'm a failure, whether it's low self-esteem or even high self-esteem. You refuse to admit that you failed, but you don't try again, or, there's just no acceptance of reality with the self-esteem issue.
And you get angry.
And you get angry.
Hostile. And you
blame
lash out.
others.
Yeah, you point the finger the other direction.
Yes.
It's early in the book, she talks about the counterproductivity of perfectionism. She says perfectionists are at a much greater risk for eating disorders, anxiety, depression, and a whole host of other psychological problems.
I'm a recovering perfectionist.
Well, I think when we come through, thanks for admitting that, by the way. More of us should admit that when we come through an education system that says you can't have a future if you don't make the mark, perfection is kind of like, is that where you're telling me I need to be? And that's where you're off base if that's what you think the message is.
Right.
And if it's reinforced at home when you bring those grades in. And I know I've had my husband said he brought in like a A-, and his dad said, well, why not an A+, what's the deal? But, it's an A.
Yeah.
But that idea that, okay, it wasn't good enough. I'm not good enough. I don't measure up to the expectations of my parents. That's not a happy feeling.
No, and it's that you start blaming yourself, right? When you're a perfectionist, you start saying, oh,
well, where's the fault lie in that
I'm
case?
so stupid, or I don't know what I'm doing with these podcasts. I guess I should just quit.
Yeah. What are we doing with these?
In the beginning. Versus saying, just because I messed up, that doesn't make me a failure. I'm still a worthy person. So let's go into these three components of self-compassion. So self-kindness, what does that mean? And we're kind of getting to that, right? That we can be gentle with ourselves.
Just like you would, like I would be with you. If you had said, what an awful podcast, I would say, no, you're doing great. We're having a great time. Well, don't worry about it. But for me to say that to myself is harder.
Right.
And it's what she's saying.
Right.
You can learn to do that. And that's the whole blessing she gives in the book is you can learn to be kind to yourself.
Right. And I love that. I think that's the easiest way to think of it is how would you respond to a friend? Mm-hmm. Well, tap into your inner friend rather than inner critic.
Yeah, she in her book, she structures it with some exercises. She gives anecdotes. She'll tell little case stories about somebody she knows, and then she does my story. She tells on herself, which makes her, kind of a friend as you're reading this. She's sharing intimate. I thought she was pretty revealing and honest, which is what she says we should be. But that idea of the three chairs. There's an exercise, she says, pretend, when you find yourself, if you can, the trick here is the antenna that we're going to say, oh, I'm hurting, I'm suffering. I need to pay attention to that. Well, if you can remember that, then do this exercise. There are three chairs, and you sit in one chair and act like yourself, and then another chair and you act like your friend. Mm-hmm. And then the third chair, do you remember what it was? But there's third perspective on this, maybe the world as a whole. As what would you say to yourself being these other entities. And I thought, oh, that would be fun to play with.
Yeah. She has some wonderful exercises in this book. I kind of, as I said, I was listening to this and I kind of didn't fully pay attention to the exercises, but I think they are wonderful. And if you want to spend some time really getting in touch with self-compassion, these exercises would be really helpful to do so.
Yeah, the book we read about Unleash Your Inner Health, this is a way to unleash your inner health too, is finding self-compassion.
Yes.
But he had that list where you tear it out and put it on the refrigerator. Some of these things you could tear out and put on the refrigerator as well.
Yes, yeah. Or put by your bedside and do before bed or something if you're a journal before.
Which she suggests.
Yeah.
A gratitude journal.
So self-kindness is, just that noticing the mean things that we can say to ourselves that we would never say to anybody else, and then trying to reframe that in a more kind manner. And then the second thing is common humanity. When we realize that everyone suffers and that we are not alone in feeling this way, it somehow is this huge relief. It makes a big difference rather than thinking we're isolated or we're the only ones who have ever
experienced this.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you, like I say, you have to be aware enough to think that thought, and that's what you have to practice.
Yeah, so
because it doesn't come natural.
Should probably be mindfulness first.
I think so.
Because it really is all about being aware of what's going on in that head first,
yes,
and then changing it.
Yeah, noticing. Oh, I just forgot to take the dog for a walk or whatever. She has that terrible episode where she's in a rush and she drops the coffee, and then she forgets the dog poop bag, and then she's out, and then she can't find her car keys, and then she's like 30 minutes late and walks into the meeting, and everybody's saying, "Where have you been?" And she, just negative. But then she shows you how things could have worked differently if she had been mindful at the beginning of that, noticing the dog, didn't mean to knock the coffee over, and isn't he cute, and pet him, this kind of. But anyway. Yeah, I would agree with you. Restructuring the order there would work better for me, because I think you have to know to have the thought to say, oh, this is the time I need to practice self-compassion.
Right. And I like her definition. She says it's acknowledging both painful and pleasurable feelings without minimizing or exaggerating. So one of the things that I feel like I grew up with, and many other people maybe relate to this, is we were maybe taught, don't cry, or it'll be okay. And we try to fix things really quickly instead of just feeling what we're feeling. And I think now with self-compassion, there's this shift to, it's okay to be sad. We don't have to fix that or cover it up or ignore it. Let's just accept it for what it is without minimizing it or making it worse.
I think from what we've learned from grief, that's huge. People need to experience grief, and a lot of times they don't let themselves do it at the time that it might serve them better, and then all sorts of gyrations occur. So that's a big example to me of experiencing the wound, and even if it's a small thing, an insult or a disappointment in yourself, experience it, allow it to be what it is, and then it resolves.
Right. I love the saying, name it to tame it.
Yeah.
So if we can just call out what we're feeling, that's a form of mindfulness, being able to call it out, and then it does tame the feeling. It gives it the attention it needs, and then it can go away a little quicker in my experience. So I thought you would really appreciate her bringing up oxytocin and how self-compassion is tapping into oxytocin that makes us feel calm, safe, and warm, and can decrease the sense of fear and anxiety. Do you remember reading that?
Yeah, I do. There's something in there about bondage. There was some quote from some comedian.
Oh.
Instead of bond, it was bondage. Did you see that?
Yeah,
and I can't remember.
An embarrassing moment where someone said,
"Yeah,
there's nothing like the bondage between
It's,
a
no,
parent
that's not,
and a child.
no, yeah.
Oh, bondage.
Yeah, no, that's not what it means. Bonding.
But I think because she was talking about the oxytocin is what comes out in a mother when she is nursing her child. And when we're feeling connected to other people.
When you hug someone.
When you hug someone, that releases oxytocin, that feel-good hormone. Hormone? Is it a hormone?
Yes. Out of the pituitary gland.
And so when we are literally using self-compassion and saying, oh, this is what she'll say often in the book, oh, darling, it's okay, you're just having a bad day.
Oh, darling.
That we are releasing that oxytocin to make ourselves feel calm. And it is a practice to be able to do that to ourselves, but once we do it more often, it'll come easier.
Yeah, and she says if that doesn't help you, then you move to the self-hug. You know, I mean, she has a series of actions you can do if you don't feel anything happening that's lowering this tension or whatever. Then try this next, and then try this next. And laying out flat on the floor or in the grass, like I like, and noticing the back of your head, where am I hurting? Notice where that pain is, and then focus on it and release it. So those are some of the exercises. And she says you want to soften, soothe, and allow.
Oh, go into that a little bit.
Well,
soften the emotion?
Next time you experience difficult emotion and want to work with it directly, try processing the emotion in your body. To begin, sit in a comfortable position or lie down with your back on the floor. Try to locate the difficult feeling in your body. Where is it centered? In your head, your throat, your heart, your stomach. Describe the emotion using mental noting, tingling, burning, pressure, tightness, stabbing, and sometimes you'll feel numbness. Can you bring attention to the sensation? And then you just work on through that. So she'll lead you through the exercises of that softening it and then soothing it, like you said, oh, poor dear, pat, rub yourself. And then, and you might pat your tummy if that's, where it is. And then you go, oh, it's going to be okay. It sounds goofy, but she says it works.
Yeah.
And I think it probably does.
It does. And I know it's a hard concept for people who they just feel like that inner critic is the right thing to do to be harsh with ourselves. But I challenge everybody to pick up this book. She also has a workbook and a great website. So you mentioned the exercises in the book.
Yep.
But they're also on the website in MP3 form as a meditation.
That's true. That is true. That was really
for free,
nice.
yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I want to say, when we look at the research, because she does have a bibliography, and her bibliography is not standard either. She does it... she's like on chapter 3, she says, as I've defined it, self-compassion. That's the sentence that she uses. And then she gives you the reference. So in her bibliography, she notes what she was talking about when she made the reference. And I thought that was kind of a neat way to do a bibliography. However, back to this experimentation thing, it seems like she used a lot of graduate students. And I don't know, or a lot of undergraduate students, a lot of college students. And she'd put them in situations and have them reflect on something, and then she would do her inventories. And I felt like, if you go to college, are you a guinea pig in an experimentation factory? And so I had a reaction to that. And then a lot of some of the things she was talking about were based on animal experimentation, the Maslow experiments back in the 50s with the monkeys, the rhesus monkeys, and isolation. Those were brutal experiments, and we now have protection of animals in research. And so a lot of this psychological stuff was brutal. And it's true for all of science. There are things in the medical science and in the other sciences that didn't protect the subjects in a way that we can now, hopefully. So I just wanted to make a note of that.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Yeah.
And you know that long word, FLOCCINAUCINIHILIPILIFICATION? Did you run across that word?
What?
That's the longest word in the English language, and she used it. So I thought, well, that's kind of fun. What the heck does that mean? It's defined as the habit of estimating something as worthless.
Interesting.
So your self-flagellation, if you tell yourself you're worthless. Yeah. My favorite part of the book, wait, did we finish the 3?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, because my favorite, I finally know why I read this book. She has her story. She has a son who is autistic.
Right, and she talks about it quite a bit.
Yeah, and she talks about her marriages. The first one failed and why it failed, and the second one why it succeeded, and how they are, in their wedding vows, they made a commitment to help each other with self-compassion. Well, the story of this autistic child's development by their travels, I loved the story. They took this kid to Siberia or to Mongolia, and it had to do with horses and the healing power of these shamans and the banging of drums and the beating with whips. And I mean, it was, did you remember this story? She got whipped with a rawhide thong because there was an evil spirit ancestor that was in her womb at the time of the conception, and so she had to do all sorts of things like wash her lady parts with vodka, and she and her husband were beaten, not severely, but she said it was noticeable. However, there were miracles that came out of this whole experience, and their child talked. He made a friend. He became potty trained. He was maybe 6 or 7 years old and still not potty trained, and through this experience. And then they were told to take him to another shaman of any culture they would like, but once a year to do that. So they did it. So they made a documentary called The Horse Boy. And I would love to see that documentary because autism is on the rise in our country. Mm-hmm. And so what they've done is they've developed a workshop for parents of autistic children and for the autistic children and they're using horse therapy. So
yeah, that would be an interesting thing to watch.
I love that part of this book, and that was towards the end, and I just thought, this is why I read this book. Because it was difficult for me.
Well, although it was difficult, would you recommend it to someone else?
I found the reading laborious, so I would say I'd like to listen to it before. I like the ideas of what's in it a lot. I just thought it went on for way too long. I felt it could have been a little more succinct for me.
Yeah. And then maybe you could skip
and just get to that story. Just get to the story.
Well, I think it's later in the book that she goes into the different self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. So maybe skip into that part if you find that self-compassion would be something, like you said, to release your inner health, because although it's very much a mindset thing, it can be tied to our experience in life. No matter how healthy we are with our diet and our exercise, if we're beating ourselves up inside, we have a tendency to be depressed and not the things that you want to get from a healthy lifestyle. So
absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I think going to a 4-day workshop with her would be a lot of fun.
It would.
Yeah. You know, I would think an experiential, because then you would probably be called to task on these exercises.
Right.
Because when you read or listen, you can say, I'll do that later. And then you never go back and do it. True. And you don't get the full benefit of what perhaps could happen with the ideas she's sharing with us.
True. Well, I do recommend this book, and at Well Balanced Nutrition, a private practice between myself and another registered dietitian, Lucy, we do talk a lot about self-compassion, because it does tie into body image and the way that we eat and feel in our body. And if you would like some help on your wellness journey, please visit us at wellbalancednutrition.com. What about you, Eleanor?
I'm Eleanor Russell, and I'm at 360healthforyou.com. We look at making healthy happen, and it's not just what you put in your mouth or on your body or around your body. It has to do with the whole constellation of wellness practices. And we believe that thoughtsmanship is huge. What you're thinking in your head has a great effect on your well-being. And I think this book fits right into some of the ideas that we help promote in our business as well. So Eleanor Russell, 360healthforyou.com.
Awesome. This has been fun. Thanks for reading Self-Compassion with me.
And don't beat yourself up anymore.
That's right. Have a great day. Be kind to yourself.
Absolutely.
and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristin and Eleanor.